What's up, guys? Welcome back to Muscle Serpents Daily, and it is Thursday here. And I know this is the busy holiday season. Everyone's out buying gifts and everything like that for their loved ones. And you know what? Hey, you might want to buy them a snake. You never know, right? I would love to someone to buy me a snake. I mean, if I ever opened up a package and there was a snake in there, I would be like, holy mackerel, finally someone got what I wanted. Hey, but you know what? Today we're going to be talking about a little bit about genetics today. That's one of the subjects I really kind of like can grip my hands around. I really enjoy. And a lot of people are confused by the different genes and what happens when there are mutant genes and you have pattern distribution differences, or you have color distribution differences, or you have a lack of color like an albino, or you have somewhat of a lack of color in a T-positive albino, or you have no pigment whatsoever in a leucistic. So let's discuss and take a look at some snakes. And maybe I can, bring some clarification to some of you guys who might not understand everything there is to know about genetics. And you know what the truth is? We all don't know everything there is to know about genetics. We're always finding out and discovering new things. And that's what makes this hobby so damn exciting. All right, guys, let's take a look at some animals. All right, let's start off with our, I guess you could say, pigment mutations. This is a T-negative albino. The T stands for tyrosinase. Tyrosinase is an enzyme that helps create melanin. Melanin is the pigment, the dark pigment we see in all animals for that matter. If the black pigment cannot be made because tyrosinase is not present, which is why we call it tyrosinase negative, meaning it's not available, this enzyme, it's defective, then we get no dark pigment whatsoever. And all we see is the light pigments, the yellows, obviously the whites, and if we had reds in the snake, we would see reds. So this is, we don't even see any dark pigment in the eyes, so we have red eyes, and we can see the blood. These are basically the blood vessels we're seeing. Okay, normally there would be pigment there blocking those out. So this is a T-negative albino, and in these, what we call mutations that occur in the pigment systems, the color mutations, we would normally see a very normal snake that behaves exactly as it would in the normal wild type. It just doesn't have, it's lacking pigment or there's a color change. And this is very common. So this is what we call our typical common T-negative albino. Now this ball python male is what we call a monarch ball python. It is a form of the T-positive color mutation. Now what is T-positive? Well, we know the T stands for tyrosinase, and the term positive would imply that tyrosinase is present. Okay, whereas in the T-negative albino it isn't. Well, it's present, but it's not present in large amounts. Some of it's defective. So it's still there, but it's not there 100%. And so we lose some of the dark pigments, the black pigments, but not all of them. And you can see the difference between this snake and the one we just saw before. You see the little browns in here. When this snake was a baby, there were purples in there. And so you have some loss of pigment, but not a lot. It's almost like a cream color. And it's kind of striking. I like the contrast in the T-positive sometimes better than the T-negatives, because once you take away all your pigment, they all look the same pretty much. But when you have a T-positive, you can do different things to it by mixing different other color mutations into it. With albino, it's hard to really influence too much the color pigmentation system once you've erased all the black that you had in there. So that's your T-positive, and we saw our T-negative. And just for a little contrast, you can see the difference. I put them together. Here is the T-positive, here's the T-negative, and the only thing that's different is there's a little bit more tyrosinase enzyme here that creates a little bit more dark melanin in this snake. All right, here we have a super fireball python. This is a black-eyed leucistic. Leucistic implies that all the pigment systems are gone. That means the black pigments, the red pigments, and the yellows. Now, of course, there's always a little exception to every rule. These super fires seem to have a little bit of yellow left in them, and I don't know why that is. This ball python actually has some other genes in it too, but that's not the reason. If you look at a regular super fire, even if you look at a super fire boa constrictor, super fire diamonds, you see some yellows in them as well. Sometimes you even see some black pigment spots, but sometimes other genes can influence that as well. But these essentially leucistic, or as they're known, black-eyed leucistic animals, have no pigment, no blacks, no reds, no yellows, and usually they have black eyes. Now, if you were to throw albino into this, you would get a red-eyed version of this. And I don't know exactly why a snake that would have no pigment systems have black eyes. That's a good question. But beautiful snake in and of itself. The difference between this and albino, obviously, is the albinos have yellows in them. This snake has no pigment. So the albinos are basically just lacking black pigment. Leucistics lack all pigment. All right, this is what we call an axanthic, animal. This is a carpet python, and it's axanthic because it lacks yellow pigments. It has the silver eyes. It's almost like a black and whitish looking snake, and this has dark pigment, obviously, so it has melanin. It has reds in it. It is just lacking the yellows, and we call this an axanthic, and axanthic means lacking yellow. So this snake is normal in every way other than the fact that it doesn't have yellow pigments in it. And you know what the truth is? When we talk about axanthic, it's lacking most of the yellow pigments, but it still does have some yellow pigments. And nothing is all or none, as we saw with the leucistic. You know, leucistic means no pigment, yet it has some pigment in it. So, but this is another one of these color mutations that we talk about. All right, this is what we call a plasma boa. This is an anerythristic boa. This is actually a blood boa. Blood meaning it has more red in it. And then we've taken the red out with the anerythristic gene, which is a gene that removes red pigment. And we're left with this basically it looks like someone sucked the blood out. It looks like an anemic snake, right? So if you saw a blood boa, you would know how red they are, and then you take that red out and you're left with the what we call plasma, which is basically a hypomelanistic, anerythristic blood boa. And this girl is going to breed for us this year. She has been breeding. Hopefully we'll get some babies from her. But the bottom line is that there's a lack of red pigment in there. She does not contain red. And that's the anery gene that we shorten, which is really anerythristic. And boas is different forms of the anery gene. We have an anery 1 gene, anery 2 gene. There's Central American versions of it. But by and far, there's a Ralph Davis reptile black-eyed anery. But anery, no matter which line it is the removal of red pigment. So we showed you the albino, which removes black pigment. We showed you the axanthic, which removes yellow. And now we're showing you the anery, which removes red. And of course the leucistic, which removes all pigment. Now the remarkable thing about the removal of these pigments, whether it be an anery gene that removes red, or axanthic, which removes yellow, or albino, which removes black, or even a leucistic, which removes all pigment, is that all these snakes seem to act very normal. They're normal in every other way other than the fact of their color. And that's obviously a good thing, in terms of genetics and in terms of breeding animals go. But then we have a separate type of mutation, which we call a pattern distribution mutation. In other words, the pattern is moved around. If it's normally in one place, it's disjointed, whether it be pied or clown or all the different ones, spider. There's different variations and different extremities of these different pattern mutations, and they do different things. But what we find is when we disturb pattern, we sometimes disturb how the animal moves and functions. And why is that? It is complicated, and it's also simple. When an animal is first developing in its mom, in its mother, in utero, whether it be a boa that's going to be born live, or it's going to be something that's going to go into an egg and be hatched out of an egg like a python, as this animal develops, if there is a mutation, in the pigment distribution centers, that's found, where the neural tube develops in these animals. The neural tube is going to be the future spinal cord of the animal. And really, if you think about it, the spinal cord is just an extension of the brain. So you have the brain, and then the bottom of the brain is the spinal cord. So as that's all developing, if you have some sort of a mutation there, which is also where the pattern distribution of the animal comes from, if something gets disturbed there, when the animal develops, you see this disjointed pattern, which we think looks cool, right, in terms of breeding and animals go. But some of these cells a lot of times have something to do with the development of the nervous system. So in some animals, especially we see it in the spider ball python, the jaguar carpet python, and in the scoria boa, the pattern is so scattered, which really looks good, right? We love the way that looks, that the nervous system maybe has some kind of a missing link somewhere, okay? Something's not connected where it's normally connected, and we sometimes see some movement issues. Now, the good thing about most of these movement issues is that they're functional, meaning that, yeah, the animal may not navigate quite as well as it did, but they eat well and they breed well, okay? And so that's, you know, that's functional, and that's going to allow them to, you know, continue to thrive. If the animal, however, is so dysfunctional that it won't thrive, and a lot of times they die, or they're just they come out of the egg, you know, dead. You know, look at a super spider ball python or a super jag. Okay, they're white snakes that are misformed, deformed, and they're non-viable. And that's because there's been too much pattern distribution. So in a super form, when you have two copies of, say, like a spider gene, it becomes too dysfunctional. And so, but you don't see these in the color mutation issues that we have. So if you have color mutations, you don't get that. And the reason is because it has nothing to do with the development of the nervous system. Whereas pattern distribution mutations affect, okay, how the nervous system develops. And most of the time it's innocuous. You don't see it and it doesn't have any effect. But in extreme cases, like some of these genes, you do see wobbles, you might see movement, you know, disturbances. Some people think it's not good or not healthy, and I don't agree with that at all. If an animal eats well and it breeds well, and it seems to be living a very happy life, you know, just like all these other snakes do that we put in a box, okay, let's face it. And ball pythons, by the way, like to be in a box. They live in a box in the nature, in termite mounds. Assuming that they're thriving and doing well, then I don't see a problem with that. If the snake's not eating, obviously, and it won't breed, there are certain genetic traits that cannot be passed on. The desert ball python was a perfect example of that. Can't, you know, reproduce. That's a problem. That's a non-viable, you know, genetic mutation. We're not going to obviously work with that mutation. And then there's certain, you know, also mutations that are just not viable in its super form. You know, look at the super motley boa constrictor. It's a black snake. It's beautiful looking, but it's just not viable. Okay? Whereas the motley is in the one copy, or the single gene, is fine. Once again, when we talk about messing with the pattern distribution, and we want to see weird patterns and labyrinths and this and that, you have the possibility of having some neural issues. Now, I've seen certain snakes that have crazy pattern distribution issues that have not been documented, that sometimes are a little neurologically challenged. Okay, just like not every spider ball python acts kooky crazy, not every, you know, other snake is going to have the same issue. But I only see these neurological issues in the pattern distribution mutations, which is consistent with what we know. Okay, because of this development of the neural tube, which is this future spinal column. When you mess with those cells, you change pattern, but you also change how the animal can think and move. Let's take a look at some of these pattern distributions. All right, here's a great example of a pattern and color morph. This little beautiful baby boy that I produced here. He is a spider, okay, and we know the spider mutation obviously creates this spider webbing like pattern. Some of these whites in here. Okay, that is a pattern distribution mutation. That's why we get a little bit of the kooky behavior. This little boy has been pretty neurologically normal as far as I can tell. Sometimes when they eat, he'll, you know, move a little strangely, but that's from the spider. He's also orange dream, which is a color change. That's an enhancing orange color. That's not going to affect behavior at all. He's also fire. Fire removes pigment. Not a problem. It's going to make it more yellow. He's also clown. Okay, so this is a fire, orange dream, spider, clown. Now, the clown is a pattern distribution mutation. I would even call it both a color and a pattern, but I think it's mostly a pattern distribution issue. I've never seen a clown that acts weird or, you know, neurologic, but there's always the potential there. When you combine spider and clown, you're obviously going to have a much greater chance, obviously, to have some kind of a neurological behavior. Once again, it doesn't always occur in every single animal. They express it differently, and that's just, you have to understand that. So there's no all or none when we talk about this. But look at this. This is an animal that has multiple mutations in it. The color mutations, obviously, just change color. The pattern distribution, okay, changes. This animal does not look like a normal ball python, right? And we know what a normal ball python looks like. It doesn't look like this. It's tremendously changed. But when we change the pattern, okay, we potentially have the ability to change some of the neurological function. Not that it's a bad or good thing. If the animal eats and reproduces, then we don't have anything to worry about. And that's just the way it is. And people can say they like or dislike different things, but that's just the genetics of how these animals work. Just for fun, I thought I'd put this normal ball python, which actually had albino, but for all intents and purposes, it looks normal. And there's that orange dream, fire, spider, clown. I mean, look at the difference. They don't even look like they're the same snake. I mean, look at the heads. Completely different. I mean, you could tell it just looks like things have been changed. And that's what we love about these mutations. We love the fact that we can change the way these snakes look and have them be so different. And that's what makes the hobby so great. It's the mutations that we're embracing. Some mutations are functional, some are not. And we have to just decide which ones we want to work with and which ones are going to be viable, which ones will be passed on, which ones will breed and eat easily. And the spider ball python, like it or hate it, has really been an instrumental mutation in making some insane looking color variations. I mean, look at this animal. And you can see this animal is moving normally. And that's not to say that, all spider ball pythons are going to do that. Some people think if you combine, you can see a little bit of a head shake there, but you can see some people think that certain mutations, okay, are going to be better than others, or that they can change them. It is what it is. You have to decide what you like and what you don't like. I like to do extreme things. I like to see snakes that have, awesome yellow color and severely reduced pattern. But that's not to say I don't love the way the normal wild ball python looks. I think that's awesome too. It seems like people can't even get a normal ball python anymore. I put a few up on Morph Market. I sold them in 2 seconds. Because I think people want the normals now. They're becoming more rare than the mutations are. But it all depends on what you want. And you just have to understand how these mutations work. The color mutations affect the pigment systems. The pattern distributions affect where these pigments are to appear and where the pattern is to appear. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's little genetics lesson and explanation, I guess you could say, of how these different morphs and mutations are formed and what they mean and how they're produced and really what's going on biochemically in the body in these snakes, because they're not just magic potions that these snakes consume. There are actually genetic changes in these animals, and it's interesting to see how these different changes affect how they look and how they perform. The great thing about it is that most of these genetic mutations are completely 100% functional. They're things that are reproducible, and the palette selection that we have color-wise and pattern mutation-wise is almost infinite. And the great thing and the exciting thing, for me at least, in breeding snakes is being able to create things that have never been created before. You start out in breeding snakes, you just want to make something that everyone else has made that's cool. And then once you make cool stuff, you want to make stuff that no one else has made that's before. And maybe you can make the new cool stuff. And that's what's all exciting about this hobby. So hopefully you guys are enjoying these little science lessons and little displays of all the animals that I have. And if you guys have any suggestions, put them in the comments below, of course, for future videos. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, turn on your notifications, and guess what? We'll see you back tomorrow morning.